the computer, obviously, and then I'll pull it up on my phone so I can follow the live feed.
The following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to week 5 of SEC Talk. The weeks just keep rolling on and the games keep getting tighter and tighter in this league as we had some marquee matchups, not only inside the conference, but also out the conference too. So we'll get into that. We'll also get into how our SEC fantasy did throughout the week. And then we'll also get into our picks of the week as we roll into week number 5. So back to me once again is my co-host is Wade. How are you doing? How was your weekend?
Very good. I was in Tiger Stadium for the nail biter victory for the LSU Tigers last night. Took it 34-31. So not the dominance we wanted to see, but it was a really good football game, and I was happy to be a part of it. A couple other good games over the weekend. I caught while tailgating. Of course, we'll cover them all for you. But yeah, great weekend. How about yourself?
Yeah, great weekend too. A lot of college football was on my TV screen this past weekend. I saw a lot of great matchups. You know, the Notre Dame versus Ohio State game just coming down to the wire. And then we also saw Oregon stop Colorado's hype train. If you wanted to get more into that, I'm sure that we'll get into our college football talk on tomorrow's Sports Scramble show. So tune into that. That'll be live on Monday night. But let's get right into it, get into some SEC action. Let's go ahead and unveil the AP Top 25 poll of how our teams did. And we have a newcomer in the poll. So now we have 7 teams in the AP poll. That is the most ever in the season. Number 1 is Georgia. They still say the same after a 49-21 victory over UAB. We have a little flip-flop. Alabama and LSU swap positions after Alabama won in Tuscaloosa pretty handily against Ole Miss, 24-10. They struggled in the first half, but then the Crimson Tide offense was able to get it rolling. Number 13, LSU dropped a spot from Arkansas. So there's probably going to be some disagreements in the comments about that drop because Arkansas, you know, they're 2-2, but they are a pretty good football team. And then number 20, Ole Miss, they dropped a couple of spots after the road loss in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And then we see 3 teams, 21, 22, and 23, rounding out the top 25. We see Tennessee coming off of a big victory over UTSA, Florida coming off of a home victory against Charlotte, and then Missouri escaping a tough test at home against a good Memphis team. Memphis gave all that they could get, but in the end, Missouri was able to come away with a slight victory. So do you see any surprises with the 7 teams in here?
No surprises. I do like seeing the 3 SEC East teams there in the top 25. So I think that this shows good balance. I don't think the conference is quite as strong as it's been in years past, but I do think it's deep, and I think it's competitive. You know, I think anybody can really hang with anybody, maybe with the exception of the dogs on top, right? But, you know, it gives Georgia some ranked matchups coming up.
And I'm really surprised, honestly, that Georgia is still number 1, really, with what Florida State did this past weekend against the Clemson Tigers, and then what Texas has been doing too. So we will see if Georgia can continue to be in that number 1 spot as we continue into the Week 5 slate. Before we get into all of that, let's go into our reminder. If you have any questions about SEC, you know, whether if you have SEC fantasy questions or if your favorite team, you know, have some questions at the quarterback position you want answered, we can answer all of them. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave one in the comment section below. All right, let's get into one of our favorite segments in this show, and that is SEC Fantasy. And that is one of our first sponsors here of the show, is presented by Mile Bros Golf. If you're looking to upgrade your golf attire on and off the course, get 15% off at Mile Bros Golf Apparel. You can head on over to milebros.com and use code BELLYUP. That's all uppercase. 15% off with code BELLYUP. All right, let's get into the first, before we get into the results, let's get into the rules. I think that once we get into week 6 in the second half of the season, I think we're going to put some little spice into this, maybe get into maybe some, if you have a running back, give them also the receiving yards. I think that's what we're going to do. And if you're a wide receiver and you run the football and get some yardage, you can add on that too. But for now, we'll get into the one quarterback, one running back, a receiver, a defense, and then once again, you cannot use a player you picked from last week. So Wade, you took the cake last week. We'll see if you can go back to back. So take it away with how your team did in week number 4.
Yeah, a pretty good showing from my bunch here. I said that Jackson Dart would have to be the X factor for Ole Miss to beat Alabama. He wasn't. They did not beat Alabama, but he did have a respectable day against a stingy Alabama defense. He threw for 244 yards, added some on the ground. So he's a guy that if we were to bend the rules a little bit for all-purpose yards, I think he would be a little bit more valuable as he's a dual threat. Woody Marks, he had just 27 yards. Mississippi State finally listened to us and just opened up that playbook from last year and really aired it out against South Carolina. Will Rogers went over 500 yards passing, I believe, in that game. So it wasn't much of a day on the ground for Marks. He had 27 yards. And Luther Burden Jr., or Luther Burden III, not his dad, he had quite the day, 177 yards receiving. And this man has just completely taken over the Missouri offense. I saw that he had like 13 of the team's 17 receptions. So, I mean, they're just feeding him the football, and deservedly so, as he had another big game. And then the Georgia defense, a little bit of a surprise here. They let up 20 points to UAB, including the first touchdown of the game to the Blazers. So not the Georgia defensive effort that we're accustomed to, but they did hold them to 336 yards. And that's a pretty good week for me. That leaves me in the positives at 112 yards. I'll take it.
Yeah, definitely take it. I was definitely surprised with Georgia defense giving up 336. Once again, impressed with Luther Burden and Jaquavius Marks. Like you mentioned, you think that you know what this Mississippi State offense is going to be one week, and then they go back to their air raid, and then Jackson Dart really struggled. That Alabama defense was elite on Saturday. So 112 is your score. We will see if that will hold up. Let's go on to my team, and the quarterback, Jaden Daniels. He looked really bad in the first half. The offense really struggled against Arkansas defense, but when it mattered, when LSU needed the most, Jaden Daniels was really on it. He had 320 yards passing. Ray Davis in his revenge game, he did have 2 touchdowns in that game. He also had 78 yards as Kentucky absolutely rolled through Vanderbilt. Jordan Watkins, I suffered at the hands of Jackson Dart not really having a good game in Tuscaloosa, only 57 yards. And then Florida's defense, only 7 points allowed against Charlotte, 210 total yards. That leads my score to 245. So both in the positives, both over hundreds. We'll definitely take that. And I take – so now our record's back to 2-2. So we'll have to have another tiebreaker. We'll see who can really stretch out this lead. So I did not use my first pick on the quarterback. I used it on the defense, but we both went with 2 SEC East quarterbacks and 2 new faces, too. We haven't seen both in this season.
Yeah, 2 new guys here. One a rookie, one a veteran, if you will. Carson Beck, I think he's done a good job for Georgia. He's definitely the unquestioned starter. And honestly, he's throwing the ball more than Stetson Bennett did a year ago, especially downfield. So this is kind of a different look for the Georgia offense. He's consistently getting 35 to 40 passing attempts a game, and he's starting to have quite a string of 300-yard passing performances. So I like him in this upcoming matchup against Auburn. I mean, the Auburn defense has kind of been up and down, so I think Beck will be a good play.
I think Beck is definitely a safe play. I'm going to go with Brady Cook going up against a Vanderbilt defense that doesn't really have any answers for anybody. So I think that he really had an impressive game. You know, he heard the boos against Kansas State. I think that really fueled his performance against Memphis. I think that's going to continue. we already see his connection with Luther Burden, and then out of the backfield with Cody Schrader. So I think that this Missouri offense is going to be clicking on all cylinders this weekend against Mizzou. So give me Brady Cook as my signal caller. All right, let's go on now to the running backs. Two really good running backs that we have. You're going with Jason McClellan, the first time we're seeing him. Jalen Wright, his second appearance in SEC Fantasy. So why don't you talk about your matchup with McClellan going up against Mississippi State's defense?
Yeah, I'm going with McClellan here. I think Alabama's prioritizing the run. They just don't have the receiver talent that they've had in the past. And honestly, they don't have a future NFL quarterback running the reins. But hey, this Alabama offense is good enough to win football games. The defense stepped up in a big way. So I think they'll kind of go through McClellan and Milroe on his legs as well. But McClellan's been here a while. He's a veteran back. And I think that you'll start to see him get about 20 carries a game. So I'm banking on a big game from him against Mississippi State Bulldogs.
Yeah, I definitely bank it on it too, especially against the Mississippi State defense that's coming off of an embarrassing performance in back-to-back weeks. Gave up 45 against LSU and then 37 against South Carolina's offense. So I'm going to go with Jalen Wright going up against South Carolina. And the South Carolina defense, they've had some concerns too in both the secondary and also in their defensive line. So I think that what Tennessee is going to want to do is just establish the running game early and often. I think that Joe Milton is definitely going to get his fair share in this game, but I'm going to go with the leading rusher for the Vols and go with Jalen Wright. All right, let's go on now to the pass catchers of who we're going to be seeing here in our Week 5 slate. You're going to go with a guy that I should have been on this for by weeks now, but he's finally seeing Malik Neighbors. And we're also seeing Xavier Leggett, South Carolina wide receiver, who's really been impressive.
Yeah, I mean, when I made this pick, I was like, oh, did I use him last week? And I was like, wait a minute, nobody's used him. It's about time we get this man on the show. Malik Neighbors went over 100 yards again yesterday. He had nearly 200 yards or maybe even 200 yards against Mississippi State. So he kind of seems matchup proof. They're going to get him the ball. I think LSU did a good job working in Brian Thomas as well so that Neighbors doesn't have to do everything, but he certainly can. And I think that he's due for another big week and a potentially high-scoring game against Ole Miss.
Yeah, Neighbors is looking like the real deal, and his draft stock is slowly climbing up the draft boards. I'm going to go with Xavier Leggett. Like I said, he's been the wide receiver one. Spencer Rattler has been looking to him really early and often, with Jaheim Bell now at Florida State. Leggett has definitely been the guy for them. And against the Tennessee defense, I think that South Carolina and Tennessee, Tennessee is going to be wanting some revenge after South Carolina's beatdown from last year. So I think that both of these offenses are just ready to go. This could be whoever scores, 35 plus is probably going to win this ball game. So I'll go with Leggett. And you also have Neighbors too. So I think that both of these wide receivers, especially Neighbors, I mean, it feels like you blink and he's already at 100 yards by the second half. So definitely going to be a high scoring shootout between these two guys. And let's go on to the defenses. And this is probably where it gets to really get tricky to pick the defenses. Both of these defenses are going up against SEC action. You're going with Alabama versus Mississippi State. I'm going with Mizzou over Vandy. So give me why you took the Tide over Mississippi State.
Yeah, I took Alabama because I think they found their mojo this past weekend against a really tough Ole Miss offense. And I think that Mississippi State might have found their groove too on offense. I think they're going to throw the ball a lot, but I just trust the talent this Alabama defense has. Even in their struggles this year, it hasn't been the defense as much. I think Texas is a really good offense, and it was expected that they would add up some points in that matchup. But they played well against the rest of the out-of-conference slate and really looked good to me on Saturday against Ole Miss.
Yeah, very impressive performance against an Ole Miss offense that was supposed to be explosive, but man, they really struggle. We'll see if Mississippi State's offense will have any answers. I went with Missouri's defense just based on that they're playing Vanderbilt. Missouri's defense have had their fair share of really good games. Against Kansas State, Missouri's defense was a story. They struggled a little bit against Memphis, but Memphis has a veteran quarterback that just tore up that secondary. I think that they're due in for a bounce back against Vandy. So we'll see how our teams do through our Week 5 slate, and we'll get the results on next week's show. But before we get into talking about more of the Week 5, let's recap week number 4. And our weekly recap here on SEC Talk is presented by SeatGeek. Belly Up Sports for 20% off of your first purchase if you want to go to concerts, comedy shows, musicals, or sporting events, SeatGeek is the ticketing app for you. All right, let's get into our first early games here of the Week 4 slate, and this was a battle of the SEC West, Auburn at Texas A&M. And there was injury. Connor Weidman went out with an injury. It was an ankle injury. And then we saw Max Johnson come in, and he had an impressive performance in the second half. Had 2 touchdowns, one of him to his younger brother. And then he also had another one to Anaya Smith. Anaya Smith is starting to be, we saw him last year deal with that injury. He was out for the year, but now he's back in this offense. We also saw Evan Stewart make some impressive catches. The Auburn offense really struggled all game. They tried to go through 3 different quarterbacks. Not really one of them could really do anything. But Texas A&M's defense really needed this one. We haven't really seen that defense that we thought that we were going to see heading into this season. But A&M's defense was able to impress. I don't know if that's more of Auburn's offense just not really being too good, or Texas A&M's defense having a good day. So what were your overall thoughts of this game between Auburn and Texas A&M?
Yeah, I think A&M did a good job defensively, and then not panicking when their starting quarterback did go down. They, of course, do have the very experienced backup quarterback in Max Johnson. And, I was actually thinking about taking Weigman, in SEC fantasy against Arkansas. I think that would be a good matchup, but I have a feeling that ankle injury might linger a little bit, but I think the team's in good shape with Max Johnson going forward. And if this defense is legit, they have all the talent. We just haven't seen them put it together. I think this A&M team can compete with LSU and Alabama and Ole Miss.
Yeah, I think that Texas A&M is right up there with those 2 teams you mentioned. But Auburn, their next test will be Georgia, and Texas A&M, like you mentioned, as that rivalry game in Arlington, Texas against the Arkansas Razorbacks. All right, let's go into our next game here on the slate. This was another 11 a.m. game, Kentucky at Vanderbilt. And Kentucky really, they got out to a 14-0 lead. One of those was a pick 6. That Kentucky defense just continues to impress. This is really the game that we saw Devin Leary be the quarterback that we all thought that he was going to be heading into the season. Like I mentioned, Ray Davis had 2 touchdowns. Just everything was working for Kentucky's offense. And Vanderbilt was able to get a little bit of late scores. A.J. Swan threw 2 pick 6s in that game. He struggled in the first half, but Vanderbilt's offense was a little bit too late. But, man, this Kentucky offense and this Kentucky team, they're quietly undefeated. No one's talking about them. And they got Florida coming up. So are you hopping back on that Big Blue Nation train going into the Florida matchup?
Yeah, I think Kentucky's right where they need to be. Devin Leary is really settled in. I think it's not too long before we'll see him featured on this show. He's a good dual threat guy. And, I think this was a good opening test for SEC play against Vanderbilt. And I look for them to continue to build upon it against Florida. With that game being at home, I feel a lot better about it for them. They've always historically had their struggles in the swamp. So I think they're very happy to be playing that game at home this weekend. But yeah, I think this offense is really balanced. I think the defense is talented. So I think there's a lot to like in Lexington.
Yeah, I think Kentucky gets a win this weekend against Florida. They're going to be right there in the top 25 along with these other teams that have stuck in. So let's go on to the next game here in this busy Week 4 slate that we had inside of the conference. And this was the SEC game of the week. Everyone was talking about this matchup. It was a battle for the SEC West. I mentioned on last week's show, whoever won this one was going to get a leg up on the SEC West. And it was the Crimson Tide that did that with a 24-10 victory. And this was an absolutely sloppy game in the first half. Alabama was able to get on the board there with a Will Riker field goal, and then Ole Miss was able to score a touchdown, make it 7-3. Then you had a couple of field goals by Alabama, 7-6 going into the half. Just a typical defensive grinded out game, and then Alabama is really clicking. You saw in the second half the team that we saw, not really in the past, but definitely better than we saw last week against South Florida. Jalen Milroe struggled in the first half, and then he really put it on. He really made some really quality throws. That one to Jermaine Burton hit him in the end zone. So you saw some of the wide receivers finally step up, make some big catches. But Ole Miss's offense just didn't really have any answers. They tried to get Judkins involved. That wasn't really working. And then Jackson Dart, he was just trying to do way too much. But Alabama, when they needed the win, they definitely got it. So Lane Kiffin once again remains winless against Nick Saban. Do you think it's ever going to happen?
I don't know. I think that that might just not happen with Kiffin. That might be his curse. I think Ole Miss is still a good football team. This might have just been a bad matchup. And I think Alabama still has some kinks to iron out, but I think they're a lot better than we, maybe thought a week ago coming off of that South Florida game. So I was really impressed by the defense in this one. And then for Ole Miss, I was kind of surprised that they weren't able to get the run game going. I figured Dart might, I don't know, struggle a little bit in a road environment through the air, but I would expect a player like Judkins to just really take off. I kind of figured he would be, over 100 yards if Ole Miss wanted to win this.
Yeah, Alabama is going to get the big victory. They go on the road to the Starkville to face off against Mississippi State. Ole Miss will look to bounce back with a home game against LSU. So let's continue on recapping here in week number 4. We go on to our next game in the conference. This was an out-of-conference game. You're not going to see many of these as we get right into conference play. UTSA at number 23, Tennessee. And man, this UTSA team just continues to struggle a week after they lost to Army at home. In the Alamo Dome, they struggled to have any fight on both sides of the football. But Tennessee, you walk into Neyland Stadium, they're coming off of a loss to Florida. You just know that this team was going to bounce back in a big way. 45 points. Joe Milton also had a bounce-back game. He threw a couple of touchdowns. Jalen Wright had everything was just going right for this Tennessee offense. So we'll just continue with this. Tennessee was able to handle their business. So let's go on to our next matchup that we had in week number 4. And this was another out-of-conference game, one of them being that Florida team that we were just talking about. Florida getting a 22-7 victory. That is honestly not the score that I was expecting. This was a very sloppy game. There was more field goals than touchdowns scored. I know it's just like one thing. They're probably still celebrating. They're hungover from that Tennessee victory. But Charlotte's one of the worst defenses ever and only put up 22 points is very, very questionable. So are you really concerned? We were very impressed with Florida's offense, but after this performance, there's got to be some more question marks.
Yeah, I think this was a step back for Florida, but I wouldn't panic. I think they just were riding the emotions of the big win against Tennessee and just came out a little flat. So I still think Florida is who they are. I don't think they're necessarily a national championship contender, but I think they're a solid football team that can win pretty much against anybody in the SEC East, maybe except for Georgia, of course. So no reason to panic. I think this offense will see better days.
Yeah, I think so. They're probably just wanted to just get through the game and get right to Kentucky. So Florida and Kentucky, that will definitely be a huge matchup in the SEC East. That could definitely be whoever wins that could definitely be the number 2 team or number 3 team there in that division. So let's go on now to the next game here in the conference slate. And this was the battle for the Golden Boot. And as always, it's a treat. It always comes down to the wire. And it's once again a 3-point game. We saw it. And pretty much in 3 straight years, it feels like it hasn't really been a blowout since that 2019 LSU team. But Arkansas went on the road to Death Valley, and LSU came away with a 34-31 victory. You were at the game. You had a bird's eye view. So why don't you give us in the next couple of minutes how this game went down?
Yeah, it was really cool to see those long passing plays develop from up there because, the ball just looks like it's on a straight line, but you can just see Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas just darting down the field. And, of course, Arkansas's tight end, number 9. He had a day, too. But, yeah, I thought that, like you said, when we were recapping Daniel's performance, he started off kind of flat. The whole offense really did. They just weren't connecting. And then I think LSU did a great job in the second half, just going for an immediate downfield shot to get Brian Thomas involved, and then a couple crossing patterns for Malik Neighbors and just getting your athletes in space. And I think the run game was a good complement to the pass game. We still don't know who LSU's main running back will be. I think it's going to be Logan Diggs. He settled in nicely down the stretch. But I think this team is still going to be fairly pass heavy from what we've seen so far. Defensively, I don't know. There was some good highlights for LSU with the pass rush, but I'd like to see this team tighten up a little bit on third down. It seemed like KJ Jefferson was able to escape the pocket on some plays and just give Arkansas some life on some plays that honestly, LSU should have made the sack or completed a tackle. So a lot to learn from this one, but honestly, a really good win. All these games are going to be hard from here on out against SEC teams.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that KJ Jefferson, he showed us why that he's one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC. You just knew that Sam Pittman's ball club wasn't going to lay down the line, coming off of that loss against BYU, that they were going to put it all on the line here on Saturday night. They fell a field goal short. Damian Ramos hit a 20-yard field goal with 8 seconds left. LSU was able to wind down the clock. But yeah, I agree with you. There's still a lot of concerns on this LSU defense. The pass rush hasn't really been there. Mason Smith, I don't know that many people are going to agree with you, but Mason Smith just really has been non-existent in these first couple of games. I know it's rust. This was a guy that he tore his ACL in the first game of the year last year. I just as expected. But if that star of an athlete, he's got to have more of a presence. And then the secondary, they continue to have their issues. I know he got an interception on that one play, Andre Sama, but yeah, LSU, getting this win definitely huge. This Arkansas team is always scrappy, and so Arkansas going to look to get a win. I mean, if you saw their schedule, I mean, they have an absolute gauntlet coming up. It started with this LSU game. Next, they have Texas A&M. LSU will hit the road, go to the Grove to face off against Ole Miss. So another rivalry game in the Magnolia Bowl. So we'll see if these teams can continue to be in the discussion for the SEC West. All right, let's get it into the next one. We're getting into our nightcap with Georgia and UAB. Georgia 49, UAB 21. And I think that a lot of people watching this show are definitely surprised of seeing 21 on UAB. But UAB is one of those teams in the Conference USA is always going to be scrappy, especially with their head coach, Trent Dilfer. That was definitely a great hire for them. That program's in the right direction. But Georgia just continues to really win. Nothing really to be said about this team. I mean, they're the number one team for the country. But I just don't think that this team's going to be tested. And if they probably not going to be consistent the rest of the way, can Kentucky maybe get in their way? Can Auburn pull off an upset? We'll see. But Georgia continues to dominate their opponents week in and week out. So let's go on to the next game here in the slate. And this was definitely another out-of-conference one, but one that we'll actually talk about because this was definitely – I know that you picked Memphis to win this game. It was definitely – not really a surprising pick. Memphis is 3-0. They're definitely going to be one of the teams to talk about in the American, with Tulane. But Missouri ended up winning this one 34-27. And it definitely didn't come quite easy, but I definitely give them credit. They could just lay down flat after that big win against Kansas State. But this was the team that I think that's going to be the real deal. A lot of people that I heard in the preseason was only picking this Missouri team to win like 5-6 games. I just didn't see it. I think that this Missouri team was definitely ready for the challenge. The quarterback play was there with Brady Cook. They have Luther Burden now, your guy who stepped up for a big game. So Missouri, very big win against Memphis. I think that this is honestly one of the best non-conference teams that they're going to see. So tip your cap to Missouri.
Yeah, I was really impressed with Missouri in this one. Of course, I did pick the upset with Memphis, and for a little bit there, I looked like a genius. I mean, Memphis did a good job in this one, but ultimately, Missouri withstood the test. They had the big emotional walk-off victory last week, and they came out with their A game here against Memphis. So I think they got a nice introduction to SEC play coming up with Vanderbilt, and I think that's another one that they can win and just kind of build upon. I mean, at some point they're going to be bowl eligible before too long, and they'll just be playing free spirited and just really let Brady Cook just take over the game. So yeah, this is a team that you don't necessarily want to have to travel to. I think that travel does play a factor into it. So teams like LSU, and I think Georgia's a home game for them this year. So, those teams just got to kind of look out and make sure they're not sleeping against a pesky bunch.
Yeah, this Missouri team, I think that they're going to be undefeated heading into the LSU game, and that is going to be a sneaky, sneaky game. If you're LSU, I mean, you got to be on upset alert because, like you mentioned, that could definitely be a hostile environment to go into. And the road trip is never easy, especially against a Missouri team that's just always scrappy week in and week out. You can have anything by your name, and they're going to show up. So definitely.
You know what I like though? That Missouri game is shaping to be a night game, or at least a mid-afternoon game, because I would feel much more on edge as an LSU fan if Missouri and LSU were playing at 11 a.m. after all that travel.
Yeah, it's looking likely 2:30 CBS or 6:30 on SEC Network. We'll be able to find out the details tomorrow night. Usually on Monday afternoon, they release the schedule for the next week. So we'll get that game time for Missouri and LSU. I agree with you. I think CBS is either going to take it or it's going to be that ESPN prime time with Kirk Herbstreit and Chris Fowler, since SEC
Maybe even
is
game
going to be
day.
shifting, yeah, maybe even game day, especially if LSU takes care of business. They're going to Duke this weekend, the first time. They haven't been in Tacoma in a while. So I think that would definitely be a top game day spot, depending on what other conferences matchups that they have. So very big win. I think that we're definitely both high on these Missouri Tigers moving forward. Let's go on to, I believe we had one more matchup to preview. And yes, we have Mississippi State, the nightcap, at South Carolina. And there was a lot of points scored in this matchup. Spencer Rattler balled out, only 2 incompletions, and he definitely needed to bounce back. That South Carolina played really well in that first half against Georgia, and then the second half they really fell flat. They just really couldn't lose this game. He followed to 1-3. Then Shane Beamer, hot seat is getting more hot. So they definitely needed this one. Mississippi State, though, they went back to that air raid offense that we were hoping for. They were able to do it, but their defense just continues to not have any answers to any offense. Tulu had over 245 yards in this one. I look at the stat line, like, man, I was a couple of weeks away from picking him. But, man, what did you see that these two quarterbacks with Will Rogers, like you mentioned, over 400 yards, and Spencer Rattler only throwing 2 incompletions?
Yeah, the quarterback play was superb. And look, I don't know if Mississippi State came into this game saying, hey, we're going to go back to the air raid offense. I think it was more situational, and that they saw some weakness in South Carolina's pass defense, and they just took advantage of it. After 1 or 2 drives of working the ball to Tulu Griffin, I think they realized they could do it all day. But I'm wondering if maybe they walked into what they need to be doing. They found their groove, and I'm excited to see if they open it up, because that offense is fun to watch. But South Carolina, how about the answer from Spencer Rattler, playing mistake-free football, 2 incompletions and 3 touchdowns. He's really developing into the quarterback that he was when he was recruited, so highly to Oklahoma. So I was really impressed with the offenses. I do think South Carolina's defense needs to tighten it up. Mississippi State's defense, this is the second straight week that we've seen them let up over 35 points. So Alabama's going to present a little bit of a struggle there, not through the air, but, they're a physical offense as well. So Mississippi State, they need to pull off an upset at some point to right the ship. And South Carolina, hey, they're 2-2. They lost 2 games that maybe they should have, and they've taken care of business in the other 2. So not a bad spot to be if you're the Gamecocks.
Yeah, I mean, especially with their schedule, open up against North Carolina, and then 2 weeks later you face off against Georgia. So the schedule isn't easy. But I think going 2-2 now, you have to, the schedule doesn't get it easier for them. You have to go on the road to Knoxville against the Tennessee team. That's looking to just continue their momentum. In the Mississippi State, boy, if they drop 3 in a row, then it's definitely going to get ugly. And Starkville, the rest of the schedule isn't very easy. So yeah, both of these defenses just need to get back to the basics and tackle. There's a lot of missed tackles on Saturday night, so definitely have to clean it up. So we'll see how Mississippi State and South Carolina fare the rest of the way, especially going into the week 5. But before we get into that, let's go on to how the team picked. So we had 7-2 for Wade. He had 2. He picked Ole Miss. A lot of people I saw in the nation were going on Ole Miss, but I just knew that this Alabama team was going to lose back-to-back home games. They haven't done it since the 07 season. And then you also try to get off that Memphis upset. It almost worked, but still 7-2. First undefeated one that we see is 9-0. I think this was a pretty easy week. I mean, there was like Alabama. You had LSU versus Arkansas. That was definitely tough. And then also Chet, the upset specialist, 8-1. So definitely really good picks weeks for us. Not really any of us have been even close to that 500 mark. So we'll see if we continue this hot streak moving into this next week of games. So let's get right into it. Another week. Let's get into our SEC Week 5 preview presented by Fanatics. You'll see our link scroll through the bottom of your screen there. So let's dive right in to Week 5 in the conference, starting off with a big game here in the SEC East. This could definitely have some implications on who could be that team right behind Georgia, or maybe the team who can compete with them. So we have number 22 Florida at Kentucky. I hate that this one is at 11 a.m., but the schedule and how it sets up, so be it. So Florida coming in off of a 22-7 victory over Charlotte. That offense of Graham Mertz, one game against Tennessee was looking good. I think that Florida's rushing attack is definitely going to have to get going if they want to pull this one off. But Kentucky, we saw Devin Leary and that offense really step up against Vanderbilt. So do you see the Cats staying undefeated, or do you have the Gators pulling off the road win?
I got to stay with Big Blue Nation, man. I mean, I think this team is really rounding into form. I like the balanced attack with Devin Leary at quarterback and Ray Davis, the experienced running back. Florida, I think, is also a really good team, but this is a tough road test. It's an early kickoff, like you mentioned. I just tend to favor the home team in that, noon or 11 a.m. kickoff kind of situation.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a defensive battle. I just don't really see many points scoring in this one. Both of these defenses have been clicking on all cylinders. It could definitely come down to whoever has the ball last and who maybe had to kick a game-winning field goal or had to go to that 2-minute drive. But I agree with you. I'm going to go with the home team. I've really been impressed with this Kentucky team the past couple of weeks. They've just been flying on the radar. No one is really talking about them. But I think that this is where they get that big win and they sneak right back into the top 25. Do we have a clean sweep? Yes, we do. We're all rolling Big Blue, so no love for the Gators. If you have, want to pick along with us in the comments, or any of you picking with Florida, but we'll see if this doesn't come back to bite us in the butt as we're all picking the Kentucky Wildcats to pull off this home victory. So let's go on to the next one. The Lone Star Classic here between Texas A&M versus Arkansas. This one is always a battle. This series has been dominated recently by Texas A&M, but Arkansas always play them scrappy. So like you mentioned, there are some question marks of the health of Connor Weigman. Is going to be ready to go. Who knows? If he isn't, we're going to see Max Johnson getting the start against this Arkansas defense. That has been up and down this whole entire season. But if Arkansas and that offense can play the way that they did with KJ Jefferson, I think that this is definitely going to be a really good game to watch and a fun game to watch out there in Arlington. So you're going to roll the Aggies or go with the Hogs?
This one's really tough because I do believe in both of these offenses. A&M's a little hobbled. Arkansas looked really, really good, even without Rocket Sanders. So I'm going to go with A&M. With this being at a neutral site, I do expect a lot of A&M to be there, A&M faithful to be there in Arlington, in the Cowboy Stadium. I think Arkansas will show up as well. If this was a true road game to Arkansas, I would probably take the Hogs in this one just because of the travel factor and the atmosphere. But I'm going to stick with the Texas team and the Aggies. I think it'll be close. I mean, I think both teams could get in the 30s, kind of like the LSU game, 34-31.
It could definitely be similar to that. This was a very tough one for me. I'm definitely love both of these teams the way that they did, but I just went with how the defense has been playing. I think that Texas A&M, they started the season slow, but they really did a good job against Auburn. I think that they continued that momentum. Connor Weigman or not, I think that Max Johnson could definitely be the guy that can lead Texas A&M to a close victory. I think this is going to be really close. Either a field goal game is going to be similar to that LSU-Arkansas game. Like I mentioned, Arkansas definitely has to clean it up in the secondary. They just let up too many big plays against LSU. You have to limit that against Texas A&M. But I think that Jimbo Fisher and the boys get it done in a very close one. So I'm taking the Aggies to win. And we have another clean sweep. We sure do, folks. Another all Texas A&M. So we're all rolling with the Aggies to pull off the victory in AT&T Stadium in Jerry World against Arkansas. So let's continue on. We have our 2:30 game, number 1 Georgia at Auburn. It's definitely weird not listening to the Brad Nessler and Gary Danielson in this week for the 2:30 game. We'll see if they're back. Who honestly cares? I know that there's a lot of people who don't care for them, but we have another rivalry game here. It's a rivalry week, early one here in the last weekend of September before we turn the calendar to October. Georgia remains the number 1 team at Auburn. Auburn coming off of their first loss on the road to Texas A&M. Do you have the Tigers pulling off the major upset, or do you have the Dogs rolling on?
I don't see a trap game here. I know it is on the road, but I think Georgia gets it done. Auburn, I can't tell if the defense is really good or not, and I just don't have a lot of faith in the offense. I mean, I would have liked to have seen a better effort against Texas A&M. for me to pick them as a potential upset. I think the only thing they have going for them is the fact that this is a rivalry game. The fans will get up for it. The players will get up for it. But ultimately, I just don't think there's enough talent to pull it off.
Yeah, I think, I wouldn't be shocked if this is like a low scoring, kind of similar to the South Carolina game, just because it's in Jordan Hare. And like you mentioned, the fans are definitely going to be riled up for it. But there's just the offense just really concerns me for Auburn. I just don't think that there's going to be many touchdowns scored for them. So I am going to go with Georgia. I think they do pull away in the second half. I think that Carson Beck really takes over this game. I think that he really goes to Brock Bowers and his top wide receivers. Rob Thomas, he's been involved in this offense. So give me the Dogs to roll over Auburn, and Chet is also going to go with Georgia as well. And we have Micah coming in here, chatting in well. A huge fan of this. Definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, Micah, appreciate you watching.
Yeah. All right. So we have all Georgia, all clean sweep. So hopefully we get some disparity in here. This is just too much agreement here. But we have another SEC East matchup, number 23, Missouri. This has been like the Missouri show. We've just been so high on this team so far. But they're going on the road to Vanderbilt, the construction zone. If you haven't watched the game, Vanderbilt has a construction zone. They're working on some improvements at that stadium. It definitely looks nice. If you haven't looked at any of the blueprints, it's going to be very nice for all the fans, but very tough matchup here for Vandy against Missouri.
Yeah, and it doesn't get easier for the Commodores. If they want to hang in an SEC game, I think that they need to try to bring their A game. I just don't see it happening. We spent a lot of time hyping up Missouri. I think that this offense is really finding their identity week to week, and I think defensively they're a little bit better than we thought so coming into the season.
Yeah, I mean, if I pick Brady Cook, Missouri's going to win this game. So give me the Missouri Tigers to win this one. It's going to be pretty convincingly, too. Vanderbilt, I just lost all hope for this team. Maybe they surprised, they surprised us, last year with a couple of wins that we didn't see. But in the end, I just think that this defense is going to be the challenge for this Vanderbilt offense. A.J. Swan has really struggled to start the season. So I'll go with MIZZOU, and Chet is also going to go with Missouri. So our agreement continues on, but we'll continue as we get to our SEC talk game of the week. It is the Magnolia Bowl, number 13 LSU at number 20 Ole Miss. I mean, man, just go back to last year. Ole Miss really took a charge of this game, and LSU and Jaden Daniels really took over, scored 45 points. I think it's probably going to take 45 points to win this game. Yeah. The way that these two offenses are going, and the way that their defenses are too. It just feels like Jackson Dart, he struggled, but he's going to be looking at his chops. I'm sure that they're going to be watching the film and looking at that LSU secondary. LSU, they're probably going to be looking at the way that this Alabama offense attacked Ole Miss. So do you have this being a high-scoring shootout, and do you have the Tigers or the Rebs winning?
I definitely think this game will get into the 30s, probably for both teams. Kind of what we saw between LSU and Arkansas is what I was anticipating for this matchup. And as y'all know, I've been very high on Ole Miss all season. I thought Jackson Dart would have a really good performance against Alabama. He did not, but I still think that was more matchup dependent. I think this Ole Miss team is still legit, and they have this game at home. I mean, the last time LSU traveled to Ole Miss, it wasn't pretty for the Tigers. This is a new bunch. You do have a veteran quarterback in Jaden Daniels, but I just feel like LSU got lucky on Saturday against Arkansas. And to me, that's okay. It's a rivalry game. Arkansas brought their A game, but just kind of has me hung up on picking LSU on the road here against another rival. Sometimes it's hard to be lucky twice. And you know what? To break the jinx, I'll take Ole Miss. LSU Nation, don't hate me. I think you're going to see two Tiger heads. I think this is a good sign. Every time we all pick LSU, it does not end well. So consider me the jinx breaker. I'm going to take Ole Miss.
Well, it almost didn't work last week or yesterday against Arkansas, but the Tigers are able to pull away late. I think this is going to be a very good game. I don't know what the spread is. I'm guessing LSU is like a 3 or 4 point favorite.
2.5.
Okay, good. It's not a 17.5 like they were. It's absolutely
That was
insane.
way too
That
many
should
points.
never be that big of a spread against Arkansas because you know dang well that the LSU Arkansas game is going to come down to a field goal and absolutely did. I think this is going to be an absolute bar burner. I think that this could definitely get into the 30s, like a 38-35. Wouldn't be surprised. Also, wouldn't be surprised if both defenses showed up, and this is like a 21-17 game. You just never know what you're going to get with these defenses. It's so up and down. But I'm going to go with the Tigers. I know that this is a tough road trip, but I just think that the way that Jaden Daniels has been playing these past couple of weeks, I think that this team has been motivated since that Florida State loss. Secondary definitely is going to have their fair share. I think that Jackson Dart is going to have a couple of passing touchdowns, but I think that LSU prevails on the road against Ole Miss. And Chet is also going to go with LSU, like you predicted, to Tiger Heads, and you're going to go with Ole Miss too. Hopefully break the jinx. So we'll see what happens. You know, you could get a leg up if Ole Miss wins. You'll probably end up winning the pick'ems. But if LSU prevails, Chet and I get the point up. So let's go on now to the next one. We have another conference slate here, SEC East battle here in Rocky Top, South Carolina at number 21, Tennessee. Like I mentioned, South Carolina blew the doors off of Tennessee last year. Tennessee looking some for revenge. So do you have the Gamecocks going 2-0 in the back-to-back years, or do you have Tennessee and Joe Milton's squad getting it done?
Yeah, I think Tennessee's going to come out firing. South Carolina wrecked their playoff chances last year. Also, the injury to Hendon Hooker occurred in this matchup. So Tennessee is not going to let South Carolina surprise them. And I just don't like South Carolina's odds on the road here. This defense just has not been very impressive since the third quarter of the Georgia game. And Mississippi State, had they had one more drive, I think that, you know, we could have seen overtime in that game. So South Carolina, I think this just is a tough road trip. I think Tennessee's slightly above South Carolina in the SEC East hierarchy. And I think the Gamecocks will get some road wins later in the year, but not this week.
Tennessee has been circling this game for 365 years, and they're going to win this one. They are smelling blood in the water. They want to run this scoreboard up until it breaks. So I think that Tennessee is going to put out a statement victory against South Carolina. I think that South Carolina, they'll definitely be able to score, but South Carolina's defense won't be able to stop Joe Milton in this offense. So I think that Tennessee wins this one by 10 plus. Not really going to say the score, but I think that Tennessee makes a statement this weekend against South Carolina. And South Carolina's go right back to the drawing board. It's going to be up and down with the South Carolina team on the show. They're going to get a win, they're going to lose, and they're going to get a win, and they're going to get a lose. So we're going to go, Chet, we'll see if any upsets. Nope, not this week from that specialist, as he's going to go all Rocky Top this weekend. All right, one more game. It's our end off the nightcap. Number 12, Alabama at Mississippi State. We talked about the Mississippi State team, 2 back-to-back embarrassing losses, giving up 45 and 37. It doesn't get any easier as you have an Alabama team that's coming off a dominating performance against Ole Miss. So do you have the Tide or you have Mississippi State pulling off an upset that they really, really need?
Well, you know, Mississippi State could have the element of surprise. They're coming off back-to-back losses. They get to return home. Alabama thought that Ole Miss was the team to have on upset alert, but they took care of business. I don't think the Bulldogs have it in them, though. If nothing else, this is a tough road game, and the cowbells will be ringing. But I think Alabama settles in nicely with the run game and shouldn't have much of an issue. This game will be pretty low scoring. I don't even think Alabama will score 35 points in this one. I think it'll be like, it might be like 27-10.
Yeah, I think that Mississippi State, I feel like they have to keep the crowd involved in this one. If you can keep that Mississippi State crowd in this game, get it to a fourth quarter battle, I think that's where Mississippi State can really pull off this upset. But if it's like a blowout and the crowd's just gone, like say like the LSU game when they were just filing out the seats, so I think that they have to keep the crowd involved. I think it's probably going to be a sellout game. It always is against Alabama. When Alabama comes to town, the crowd definitely has to stay involved. But I am going to go with Alabama. I would like to see Mississippi State pulling off an upset just to have some chaos. You know, I love the chaos to happen every week to see some upsets here in the conference, but I just don't see it here. The way that Mississippi State's defense has been playing, I think that Jalen Milroe, with his dual threat capabilities, I think that he's going to use his legs more than he does in the passing game. And like your guy, Jace McCullough, I think that he's also going to have a good game. But I think that Mississippi State, Will Rogers has to have the game that he just had against South Carolina. I think that they're going to have to air it out more. I think, you know, Texas gave you the formula to really beat this team this season is to really go to their secondary because if you try and run the ball, you're not going to really have much luck against that defensive line. So I think that Alabama will win this game. I won't say by much. I just think that this could either be a blowout or Mississippi State makes this a fourth quarter battle. Could be either way, but I'm going to go with Alabama. And Chet is also going to go with Alabama. So a lot of vanilla picks from the upset specialist. I guess he just having a week off, just
concentrating on winning.
Get him on the board. But nonetheless, we are all rolling with the Tide against Mississippi State. Okay, that is it for our Week 5 slate. Before we end our show, let's go dive into some hot topics. And I guess the hot topics didn't save, so I guess we're just gonna skip right through this.
All right, hit me with some hot topics before we end the show. Let's do 3 questions.
All right, so I'll give you one off the top of my head. We have our Week 4 slate. Who won the Week 4 slate this weekend?
Honestly, I feel the best about Missouri. I think this is a team that nobody's really talking about, and they have as impressive of out-of-conference victories as anybody. I think that beating Kansas State at the time was a top 20 team. I think Memphis is one of the better group of 5 teams. So I feel good about where Missouri is. I think this team, in my opinion, went from winning 5 games in the preseason to probably 7 or 8.
Yeah, I agree with you. Missouri's my winners of the week. And let's go on now to who do you have on upset alert in week number 5?
I think we all picked the Kentucky Wildcats to beat the Florida Gators. That's a mild upset. And then, of course, I was the only one to pull the trigger on Ole Miss against LSU. I don't know if that's really an upset. LSU is favored, but it is a road game.
I'm going to put Alabama on upset alert. I just think that Mississippi State, they've just been down and out. They are hungry as can be. I just think that if they can keep that crowd in it with the Cowbells, Alabama's not going to know what they're doing themselves. So I'm not going to say that they're going to win, but I think that Alabama coming off, they're feeling good about themselves. It would have been different if Alabama lost and you had a pissed off Alabama team. Now you're just getting an Alabama team that's like, okay, we won. Mississippi State, they're not that great. So you just never know. So our last question here on Hot Topics. Who's the best SEC quarterback of the season so far?
You stole it out of my mouth. I was going to say, give me your top 3 quarterbacks. You want to do that?
Sure. You go first.
Right. Top 3. All right. At number 1, I am actually going to give it to Jaden Daniels at this point. I think he's the top quarterback in the conference. I think there's arguments for some other guys, but I really like what Daniels brings to the table. And number 2, I want to say Jackson Dart, but he didn't impress me this past weekend. Honestly, statistically, I got to give it to Spencer Rattler at number 2. I think that the accuracy was there. I would have liked to seen him play better against Georgia, but if he had some weapons in that game, I think it could have been a lot closer. And then number 3, I'm going to go with a guy who's proven something to us so far, and that's going to be Connor Weigman. I think there's an argument for Devin Leary, but we just haven't seen him on the big stage yet. Connor Weigman, to me, can sling it with the best of them, and I think that he's got A&M's offense in the right shape. So who are your 3?
Pretty similar. I'm going to go number 1, Jaden Daniels. I mean, he's just impressive passer. Last year I feel like he was just taking off and run the football more. This year I feel like he's more composed in the pocket. You're seeing that. Number 2 is KJ Jefferson. I know the stats don't really show it, but man, he showed what he can do against a talented LSU defense. He really tore them up through the air. And then I'm going to go number 3. I had Connor Weigman and Jackson Dart number 3, but I am going to stick with Connor Weigman, Jackson Dart. I mean, if he would have had a better game, I would have put him at number 3. Number 4, right? If I would give you a bonus, like Devin Leary would probably be my number 4. I think he's really starting to heat up. But I'll go Connor Weigman. I think the first couple of weeks, even the start against Auburn, he was really impressive. So that's our top 3. Let us know in the comments who you think is going to be the top 3 quarterbacks so far. I'm sure we'll be updating this. We're only in week 5. Our list could change once we get into week 10. So Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the show, leaving your comments, likes, views. We'll definitely appreciate every single one of you. And we will be right back here next week, recapping week number 5. Looking forward to week number 6. If you're on Facebook, be sure to follow the page on SEC Talk and also like the video. Tell us how you found us. And then if you're on YouTube, definitely hit that subscribe button, the like, the share button, whatever button you want to press. Our Sports Scramble giving you content every single day. We'll have our main show tomorrow. So if you want to get all sports, we'll be talking NFL, college football, a crazy week in both of the sports. So we'll get right into that. So hope everyone enjoys the rest of your week. We'll see you back here next Sunday night talking more SEC football.